That morning started out perfectly ordinary, or at least that was what I thought. The office at Westbridge Analytics was still lit by that slightly harsh white glow, the smell of coffee lingering from the shared machine, and the mix of chatter and keyboard clicks creating a background noise so familiar I barely heard it anymore. I opened my email like I did every day, ready to clear a few leftover reports from last week, but 1 second later, my heart stalled. There was an Excel file sitting in my inbox. The subject line read, Internal Finance, Do Not Forward. The sender was Kyle Harris, the HR hire who had joined about 4 months ago. I almost didn't open it. Internal files like that usually get recalled within minutes, but the preview line froze my hand. Compensation structure adjustment. I clicked before I could stop myself. The spreadsheet unfolded, rows of numbers lining up with the precision of a punch straight to the chest. My name was on the third tab, buried in a long list of employees. My salary was written clearly, $98,750. I knew I was underpaid for the market. I just never imagined the gap was this brutal. One line above me was Mason Reeves, 2 years in. I had trained him myself when he first started. His salary, $162,000. Another one, Vanessa Pratt, not even here a full year, $158,500. Then Tristan, 8 months of experience, $165,000. I kept reading the numbers, but they didn't shift. I refreshed the email to make sure I hadn't misunderstood. I hadn't. No matter how many times I closed and reopened it, nothing changed. It wasn't a glitch. It was the truth. 9 years. 9 years. Building the financial management backbone from scratch. Fixing system errors Jonah couldn't understand. Training every onboarding class. Keeping every audit spotless. And I was being paid 60% of what the newcomers were making. Some of them still asked me questions so basic that I had to stop what I was doing and walk them through every step. While I was still trying to process it, laughter rose from Mason's desk. He was showing something on his screen to the person beside him. I couldn't hear the words, but I caught a glimpse of a number in the image he had opened. I already knew. He wasn't malicious, not intentionally, but his timing felt like someone grinding salt into a fresh wound. The entire office blurred around me. I took a sip of water, but the tightness in my throat didn't ease. I saved the file to my personal drive before Kyle could recall it. And without giving myself even a second to hesitate, I stood up, laptop in hand, and walked straight toward Jonah Pierce's office. The CFO's door was usually shut, but today it was cracked open just enough to show him leaning back in his chair, reading something. I knocked twice. Jonah looked up, eyes carrying that cold, weary detachment of a man more concerned with everything outside his job than with the people right in front of him. Eliana, what is it? He said, sounding half interested at best. I didn't answer. I set the open laptop on his desk. He glanced at the screen, and even though he tried to stay composed, I saw the flicker. He knew. And he understood exactly why I was here. I want to understand this, I said, steadying my voice. Jonah pushed his chair back and crossed his arms, the posture of someone with no intention of apologizing. Eliana, you know I can't discuss other people's salaries. I'm not asking about theirs. I'm asking about mine. Why am I earning this little after 9 years? He exhaled, a long, practiced sigh from someone who had spent years mastering the art of making his employees feel unreasonable. His voice could have been a sheet of glass. The market has shifted. You were hired in a very different time. The company doesn't owe you anything. I froze. He said it lightly, as though it were a simple fact, but every word landed like a blade. I'm requesting a salary review, I said, especially when new hires are making almost twice what I do. Jonah shrugged. I'm not planning adjustments. Pay bands are set. If you think you're worth more, go find someone willing to pay you. No hesitation, no acknowledgement, not even a hint of recognition. I stood there, everything I had ever believed about loyalty and hard work collapsing into something laughable. Jonah watched me for another second, as if the conversation had already ended. I closed my laptop, walked out of his office carrying a hollow, icy clarity I hadn't felt in years. For the first time in 9 years, I knew, truly knew, I didn't belong here anymore. And if you've ever found yourself in a moment like that, Standing in the middle of an office but feeling abandoned in the middle of a desert, you probably understand why I was so quiet as I walked out. If you're listening to this, I'd really like to know where you're listening from. Leave a comment, even just one line. And if you like stories about reclaiming your worth, don't forget to follow so you can stay with me in the next chapters. When the elevator doors closed behind me, that was when I realized I was gripping my phone so tightly the bones in my hand had turned white. My whole body felt hollowed out. I do not remember how I drove home. All I know is that when I stood at my apartment door, I was still dizzy, like a wave had slammed straight into me. Denver at night was colder than usual. I opened the door, turned on the kitchen light, and the whole apartment lit up while I collapsed into a chair as if my spine had disappeared. My bag fell to the floor, the soft thud of the documents inside somehow sharp enough to sting. I had worked at Westbridge Analytics for nearly a decade. I knew every audit workflow, every gap in the risk system, every shift in the balance sheets. I had stayed up through the night to save the company during a sudden federal audit. I had patched holes that, if exposed, could have cost Westbridge millions. And after all those years, compared to someone who had been there a year or even a few months, I was worth 80%. No, 60. I leaned back in the chair, my head spinning. Memories hit me one by one. I remembered staying until 11 at night, finishing audit scripts while showing Mason how to correct account discrepancies. I remembered Vanessa Lynn, 3 months into the job and already leading a small team, while it had taken me 3 years just to earn the right to sign off on a simple form. I remembered Tristan, the new hire who confused tax reports so often he called me each time, standing there silently as if fixing his mistakes was simply part of my nature. I once believed that doing good work was enough. I once believed in basic fairness. And I once believed in Westbridge. That last belief had been shattered by Jonah in 5 minutes. I opened my laptop and set it on the kitchen counter. I had not planned to work tonight, but something pushed me to unlock a folder only I knew the password. A folder I had created 18 months ago. Inside were dozens of files, charts, spreadsheets, notes, linear analyses, payment chains, and one file named irregular.log. I stared at it for a long moment before opening it. I had discovered the first anomaly on an ordinary morning. While reviewing vendor transactions, I noticed a payment routed to a consulting company called North River Consult. The amount was not large, only $13,875. But the approval code did not match any active contract. I asked Jonah at the time. He shrugged, said it was an executive expense. Do not dig. I remembered the tone in that do not dig. It was not an instruction. It was a warning. I thought I was overthinking, so I let the first one go, then the second, and the third. By the fourth, I began keeping records. Small payments, steady, increasing slightly each quarter, just enough to stay quiet. All were routed to companies with post office box addresses, no websites, registered in the same 2 states, all with generic consulting names. I opened file after file, scanning the notes I had written myself. No originating contract, no purchase order, no assigned staff, no consulting deliverables. Only money leaves Westbridge with clockwork precision. I had spent 6 months tracing the pattern and discovered a pipeline. Funds split into smaller amounts, routed through shell companies, then gathered into a single destination. I had never figured out exactly who was behind it, but the longer I looked, the more certain I became that Jonah knew far more than he admitted. Tonight, while my thoughts were still raw from 9 years of betrayal, I realized something. Jonah underestimated me because he believed I would never leave, and because he believed I knew only what he wanted me to know, but I knew more, and I had the evidence. I opened another file named contributions_master. Inside was a list of every contribution I had made from my first year until now. The systems I built, the crises I resolved, and the projects new hires still relied on every day. I had not written them to boast. I wrote them so that if a day came when I needed to prove my worth, I would not have to start from nothing. Maybe I had been preparing for this moment without knowing it. I created a new document and titled it Legacy and Liability. Before me was a blank page, but the words in my mind poured out like a broken dam. I wrote about the systems I developed, the savings I brought to Westbridge, and the risks I prevented. I wrote about the financial irregularities I had been told to ignore. By 1 in the morning, the draft was 46 pages. By 3, I had revised it and added charts. By 4, I sent it to a 24-hour print service nearby. I put on a coat, drove through the cold night, and picked up the bound document. Holding it in my hands, I felt something I had not felt in years: absolute clarity. I no longer belonged to a place that treated me like a cheap cog. When I got home, a message from Jenna, my closest coworker, flashed on my phone. "Have you heard? Jonah is planning cuts. Rumor says your name is on the list." I stared at the screen, not surprised, just a calm that bordered on icy. I set the document on the table, and I knew it was time to go, not just to leave, but to take with me the truth they wanted buried. After the night, I printed the documents and received Jenna's message. I knew I could not delay any longer. The next morning, I sat in front of my laptop with my hands on the keyboard for a long time before typing the name of the company that had been appearing in my job invitations for the past year: Novasphere Financial. They were Westbridge's direct competitor. More advanced technology, a more transparent culture, and most importantly, they valued people based on ability. I had declined several meetings with them because I believed Westbridge was where I belonged. But last night, something in me snapped. I opened an old email from Novasphere and found the address of Marcus Hale's assistant. Marcus was their chief operating officer. I typed a simple line: "I would like to discuss a potential opportunity. I believe the time has come." In less than 20 minutes, I received a reply, short but loaded with intention. "Marcus can meet with you tonight. The location will be sent privately. No company address. No conference room. Just a pinned location. A lounge deep in downtown Denver. The kind of place people went when they wanted to talk quietly." That evening, I stepped into a dim, gold-lit space, soft jazz drifting from a corner. I had barely sat down when a man in his 50s, with neatly graying hair, sharp eyes, and a calm presence, walked toward me. "Eliana Brooks," he said, as if he had known me for years. "I am Marcus Hale." I stood to shake his hand. He observed me for a few seconds, long enough that I felt him studying every detail. Not with suspicion, but with the curiosity of someone who had heard about me for a long time and was now confirming whether the reality matched the reputation. "I have been watching your work for 3 years," he said, "and I have always wondered why Westbridge paid you so little. I even thought maybe they knew something we did not." I let out a small laugh. "Maybe they only knew how to misjudge people." Marcus signaled the staff to close the private room door. The atmosphere shifted, tighter, quieter. He leaned forward. "Now tell me, Eliana, why did you reach out today? Not a month ago? Not 6 months ago?" I took the printed dossier from my bag and set it on the table. Marcus's eyes sharpened instantly. I told him about the risk control systems I built, the interventions that saved Westbridge during difficult audits, and the way I forecasted market volatility and recalibrated within hours to prevent losses. I described my analysis, more than 40 pages long. Marcus skimmed a few sections and paused. His voice slowed. "You know, Eliana, I have met many candidates. Very few document their contributions in detail the way you do. That tells me two things. First, you are exceptionally professional. And second, you have been preparing for this moment for a very long time." He tapped the dossier lightly. "However, I have to admit, the fact that Westbridge underpaid you for 9 years makes me a bit cautious." He tilted his head. "I need to confirm you are truly as capable as your report suggests." I was not surprised. I knew this moment would come. Marcus gave a signal. A staff member entered with a tablet and placed it in front of me. "This is our financial crisis simulation, a real-time scenario. All data shifts rapidly in the first 5 minutes. Your task is to stabilize the system within 30 minutes." I asked, "And if I do?" Marcus leaned back. "Then I will know Westbridge is the fool, not you." I drew a breath. The clock started. The first 5 minutes were chaos. Overdue debt spiking, cash flow turning negative, risk indicators shifting from yellow to red. I fell into instinct, resetting priority metrics, temporarily freezing 3 payment channels, diverting reserve liquidity into emergency buffers, then restructuring alert thresholds. By the 20th minute, I had restored the system to relative stability. I set the tablet down. Marcus looked at the screen, then at me. His expression changed unmistakably. 20 minutes, he said quietly. My technical team usually needs 40. Some even make things worse. Marcus locked the tablet and set it aside. Very well, Eliana. Now I know exactly who I am sitting with. He opened a small document case and pulled out a sheet. I want you to lead the new risk control division at Novasphere. You will design your own team, choose your people, your technology, and your processes. Base salary is twice what you currently earn, a strong year-end bonus, and a significant equity package. I went quiet for a moment, not because of the offer, but because of what it meant. Real authority, real recognition. I was about to respond when my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. I know who you are meeting. Do not forget your obligations at Westbridge. Do not make a foolish move. I did not need to see the name. I knew. Jonah Pierce. A cold line ran down my spine. He knew I was here. I did not know how, but he knew. Marcus noticed the shift in my expression. Is something wrong? I did not answer the message. I placed the phone face down on the table and looked at him. I agree in principle, but I need a few days to prepare. Marcus smiled. I will wait for your official answer. But Eliana, he leaned in, voice lower. If Jonah is watching you, that only proves you are far more valuable than they ever admitted. I left the lounge with cold wind cutting across my face, but inside me burned something fierce. I had made my decision. I knew exactly what I needed to do next. In a few days, Westbridge would receive a resignation they never saw coming. The next morning, I arrived at Westbridge earlier than usual, not to work, but to end a journey that had stretched nearly a decade. The building was still quiet, the office lights not fully on, yet something felt suffocating the moment I walked in. I glanced at the familiar walls, the desks where I had spent nights fixing system errors at 3 in the morning. Everything looked distant now, like it belonged to a different lifetime. I held my resignation letter in my hand, the paper still warm from the printer. I took a deep breath and knocked on Jonah's door. Come in. His voice was low, a little tired. I opened the door and stepped inside. Jonah was reviewing financial reports, glasses resting on the bridge of his nose. When he saw me, he smiled politely, a smile so fake I recognized it instantly. Eliana, you are in early today. What is going on? I placed the letter on his desk. I am here to inform you of my resignation, effective in 2 weeks. The smile on Jonah's face lasted exactly 3 seconds. He blinked, then quickly regained his composure. Oh, come on, Eliana, you are overreacting. All this because of that salary sheet? That situation has been misunderstood. You know, new hires always need competitive packages. I said nothing. Jonah took off his glasses and leaned back, shifting to a friendly tone. You are important to this company. I understand you are upset. If you give me some time, I can propose a few adjustments. Not right away, but next year you might find yourself in a much better position. The same old vague promises. He did not even bother to hide how empty they were. I spoke clearly. My decision is final. I cannot stay in a place that does not value me. Jonah's face stiffened. The softness vanished. His voice turned cold. Do you know what your contract says? You cannot just walk away. There are clauses on intellectual property and confidentiality. If you violate them, the consequences will not be light. I looked straight at him. I reviewed my contract. And you know very well that most of the systems I built were created off the clock, on personal equipment. They are not owned by the company. I have full documentation. Jonah frowned. For the first time, I saw a flicker of fear in him, faint but real. I continued. You cannot use the contract to trap me. I already consulted with an attorney. He laughed, a joyless sound. You think you understand the law, Eliana? We have an entire legal team here. They can make things complicated if you insist on this. As if waiting for a cue, Jonah pressed the intercom button. A few minutes later, 2 legal staff members walked in with a stack of documents. They began outlining clauses, tiny lines no one ever reads, requirements for handovers lasting more than a month, conditions so unreasonable that it was obvious they were meant to stall me. Jonah crossed his arms, watching me like someone enjoying the sight of a cornered opponent. But he forgot one thing I had prepared. I took a thin folder from my bag. Inside was a breakdown of every project I had worked on in the last 3 years, clearly separated between company hours and off contract innovations, backed by timestamps and device logs. I placed it in front of them. If you want to use intellectual property clauses, then let us determine what actually belongs to the company. The room fell silent. One of the legal staff opened the folder, read a few lines, then looked at Jonah with a warning in his eyes. Jonah's jaw tightened at the sight of his strategy starting to collapse. I stood. I will complete a reasonable handover, but if you try to obstruct me, I will escalate with my attorney. I expected him to lash out, but instead he smiled, a sharp, icy smile. Very well, Eliana. But remember, the company has the right to inspect all devices and data you use for work. If we find anything unusual, you will be held accountable. The threat landed like a locked door slamming shut. Jonah had finally thrown his heaviest punch. He was sending the IT team to search my computer. I knew this moment would come, and I had made sure the company machine held nothing. All my analyses, every sensitive record, all of it was created on personal devices and stored where Jonah could never reach. When I'd arrived and began the inspection, I simply watched. They combed through every folder, every log, every trace. After 30 minutes, they returned, expression neutral. We did not find anything unusual. Jonah clenched his jaw so hard the muscle jumped. He said nothing, but the hatred in his eyes was unmistakable, as if I were the traitor of the century. I closed my laptop and packed the last of my things. As I reached the door, I heard Jonah speak, voice hoarse and poisonous. I will not let you walk away peacefully, Eliana. I turned back. You have not let me live peacefully for 9 years. This is me freeing myself. And I left the room, left the building. It felt like someone had finally cut the rope that held me bound for years, though my wrists still ached from how long it had been there. I stepped into the cold air, breathing in the sharp edge of freedom. But I knew one thing clearly. Jonah's words were not an empty threat. The real battle was only beginning. On my first day walking into the building of Novasphere Financial, everything felt completely different from the heavy hallways at Westbridge. The atmosphere here was bright, fast-paced, but never suffocating. People spoke in short, clear exchanges without judgment or hesitation. It felt as if I had stepped out of the dark and into the light. Marcus met me at the reception desk. He walked me through each department, explaining while carrying that quiet confidence of his. When we reached my area, he pointed to a row of glass-partitioned Parmesan desks. This will be your team. 6 people, each with a strength of their own. I believe you can lead them. New faces turned to greet me, all polite, except for a tall, lean man with thin glasses named Raymond. He only nodded, though his eyes were sharp and analytical. I knew his type, smart, perfectionist, and unwilling to trust until proven otherwise. Marcus placed a folder on my desk. There is an unresolved issue we have not been able to fix. If you can break this knot, the team will have no hesitation following your lead. I opened the file. It was an error in the risk forecasting model, one that caused false alerts during volatile market swings. Novasphere had paused the model for more than 3 months. Raymond stood behind me with his arms crossed. We have tried everything. If you have something different, I want to see how you do it. I pulled out my chair, opened the model, and began reviewing parameters. Watching the code scroll across the screen reminded me of years spent at Westbridge fixing breakdowns in a few hours to keep entire systems from collapsing. Those experiences, though never acknowledged there, had become my advantage now. About 15 minutes later, I found it. A key variable had been mapped to the wrong subset of data. The error only surfaced during large load processing, making it nearly impossible to detect without the right simulation. I corrected the reference, recalibrated the model, and reran the tests several times. When the results stabilized, I turned my chair around. It is done. That was the cause. Raymond leaned in, checking the output. His eyebrows lifted. I cannot believe it was that small a reference. Marcus reviewed the comparison report and let out a laugh. You just solved what the team has been wrestling with for months. Welcome to Novosphere. Relief washed over me. Not because I needed recognition, but because I knew I was finally standing in the right place, doing the work I was meant to do. In the afternoon, while I was organizing my files, my phone buzzed. A message from a former colleague at Westbridge. Your system is failing nonstop. No one can fix it. Jonah is losing his mind. I set the phone down without replying. Even though I had prepared myself, the news still hit with a faint sting. Not for Jonah, but for the people left behind to carry the chaos. Rumors spread quickly that a major client had already sent a complaint about inaccurate reporting. Jonah was holding emergency meetings, yelling at everyone because no one could operate what he called Eliana's system. But he never understood that no system survives without the right leadership behind it. While Westbridge drowned in failures, Novosphere was moving in exactly the opposite direction. I began restructuring the risk control framework using updated standards, merging the scattered models Novosphere had been using. My team was eager to collaborate, and even Raymond contributed thoughtful insights. Together, we built the first unified design in just a few days. When we ran the model, everyone stood around the server, anxious. The results came after nearly 3 hours. Error rates dropped by more than 30%. Processing speed increased significantly. Alert points became clearer and more stable. I saw Marcus fold his arms, shaking his head in disbelief. If this is only the testing phase, I cannot imagine how powerful it will be once completed. Raymond stepped closer to me, this time with genuine respect in his eyes. Now I understand why they never valued you correctly. Over there, they put you in a box far too small. I simply smiled. There was nothing more to say. By the end of the day, as I organized my new workspace, it struck me how completely my life was shifting. Everything I did here was recognized. No doubt. No belittling. No one is trying to turn my work into an invisible number. As I stepped out of the building, another message arrived from an old friend. The company really is falling apart without you, Eliana. Jonah is losing control. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, then turned the phone off. I did not belong there anymore. I stepped into the Denver night, feeling lighter than I had in years. This was not just a new beginning. This was the first time in a long time I felt like myself again. And like I was finally standing exactly where I deserved to be. In the weeks after the new risk control system went live, Novosphere changed so quickly that I sometimes wondered if I was dreaming. Every internal report showed a surge in transaction efficiency, analysis time cut nearly in half, and risk predictions so accurate that Marcus admitted he had never seen a model this complete. Department heads kept stopping by my office asking how to integrate the new system into their processes. The constant meetings, filled with energy instead of dread, made me feel alive again, as if I were finally using every skill I had never been allowed to show. Each day, I walked into the office with a sense of anticipation, something I never thought I would feel again. And then the changes outside began. In the second week after the system stabilized, Marcus walked into the conference room with a wide grin. He turned on the projector and said, "We have officially signed Allerton Holdings. They ended their contract with Westbridge last week." A quiet cheer rippled through the room. Allerton was a major client, once the pride of Westbridge. Their departure was not just a sign of disappointment. It was the first tremor of an earthquake. And Allerton was not the only one. 2 days later, Greywood Capital announced a strategic partnership with Novosphere, then Axiom Retail. And then the biggest deal of the year, Haversham Trust. It all happened like a chain reaction that could not be stopped. Market reports began calling Novosphere a rising star, while Westbridge was labeled directionless, poorly managed, and rapidly losing client trust. I read those articles with complicated emotions. I did not relish Westbridge's collapse, but I could not deny the relief of seeing the truth finally recognized. Meanwhile, at Westbridge, Jonah was like a drowning man grabbing at anything within reach. According to messages from former coworkers, he held emergency meetings nearly every day, shouting because he could not understand why clients were leaving so fast. He blamed operations, blamed engineering, blamed departments he had ignored for years. And when desperation pushed him further, he returned to his favorite target, Me. One morning, Marcus walked into my office with a serious expression. We just received unofficial information that Westbridge is preparing a lawsuit. Jonah is accusing you of stealing algorithms you built while employed there. I exhaled slowly. I had expected this. Are you worried? I asked. Marcus sat down, fingers interlaced. I worry about the hassle you will face, not the legal side. We reviewed your entire record. None of it belongs to Westbridge. But Jonah, he will try anything. And he did. A week later, Jonah hired an independent security team to dig through every trace related to my old work. Their goal was simple: find anything they could twist into a claim. One day they thought they had found something. I got the news from an old friend. Eliana, they found an email you sent Jonah 3 years ago. You suggested signing a legal transfer for some algorithms. Jonah is saying it proves corporate ownership. I remembered that email perfectly. I had suggested creating a formal contract for a project I developed off the clock, so we would not run into problems later. Jonah had replied with one short sentence: no need. Leave it. I had kept that reply in my personal records for 3 years. On the hearing day, the Novosphere legal team and I sat across from Jonah, who looked far more worn down than the confident man he once pretended to be. He tried to hold a cold expression. Eliana developed predictive systems while employed with Westbridge. All intellectual property belongs to us. Novosphere's attorney calmly placed a printed copy of the email on the table. Please note, Ms. Brooks requested a formal transfer agreement following the procedure. Mr. Jonah Pierce refused. That means the project was never corporate property. The room went silent. Jonah's face drained. The attorney continued. Furthermore, Ms. Brooks completed the project using personal equipment, on personal time, with verifiable logs. Westbridge not only does not own the work, but they explicitly rejected ownership. The case was dismissed on the spot. The hearing ended in less than 20 minutes. Jonah stood up and walked out without looking at anyone, papers rustling behind him. I knew that accusation had been his last attempt, the final strike before everything slipped out of his control. In the following weeks, the media reported nonstop on Westbridge's decline. Analysts detailed years of mismanagement, ignored warnings, and increasing pressure from the board demanding explanations from Jonah. At Novosphere, the contrast could not have been sharper. I walked through the halls receiving smiles, congratulations, and handshakes from people I had never met. Marcus even told me that internally they had started using a nickname for me, half joking but half serious: the woman who turned the board. I did not see myself as any kind of symbol, but when I looked at my team, at the dramatic growth, I knew one thing for certain. For the first time in my life, I was standing in the right place. And I had not wasted 9 years only to walk away with my head down. I walked upward. I walked into the light. I thought I had grown used to bad news, but the independent investigation report that arrived in Novosphere's internal inbox that morning still made me pause for a long time. The Market Oversight Organization had finished its analysis of Westbridge's collapse, and the conclusion was so direct that no one could pretend otherwise. The report was long, filled with data, but there was one section that only needed to be read once to understand everything. They stated clearly that Westbridge's downfall was not caused by employees leaving, not by technical failures, but by weak leadership, outdated governance, and opaque risk management. There was no mention of me, and I knew that was right. I had tried to warn them, but Jonah never cared. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling of my Novosphere office. A part of me felt satisfied that the truth was finally exposed, but another part felt no relief at all, because behind those objective lines were dozens of people losing their jobs, their income, their futures. That afternoon, as I stepped into the parking garage, someone called my name. I turned and saw Wilson Cartman, who had worked in Westbridge's internal audit department. He was one of the longest-serving employees there, steady, responsible, never causing trouble for anyone. But now he stood in front of me, looking decades older than the last time I saw him. I was genuinely happy to see him, yet I could not ignore the guilt twisting inside me, even though I knew I had nothing to do with his layoff. He smiled, but the sadness in his expression outweighed the warmth. They thought you were the most important person in Westbridge, he said. So when things got bad, they cut us to protect Jonah's image. They want outsiders to believe the problems came from the staff, not the leadership. I went still. I knew Jonah was arrogant and selfish, but I had never imagined he would make choices this cruel. Wilson sighed. Eliana, I do not blame you. I just wanted you to know that many people got dragged into that mess, even though they did nothing wrong. The system collapsed, clients left, and the weakest people were the first ones pushed out. All I could do was thank him. He shook my hand and walked away, leaving me standing alone in the garage, feeling like the entire city of Denver had gone quiet. That night, I could not sleep. I sat by my apartment window, watching the city lights flicker, thinking about the familiar faces at Westbridge. The ones who had brought me coffee, who stayed late with me to check numbers, who rushed around during unexpected audits. And now they were curled up in uncertainty because of Jonah's decisions. I knew I had not caused this, but the uneasiness did not let me go. While Westbridge was in freefall, Novasphere kept growing stronger by the day. With the new system fully deployed, transaction capacity exceeded projections. Marcus even put all three analytics groups under my oversight, something I had never imagined. In one meeting, Marcus said it plainly. Eliana, we want to build a new strategic division. You will run it, design it, choose the technology, and hire the people. Do it your way. I nodded. I knew this was the opportunity Westbridge would never have given me, no matter how hard I worked for 9 years. But what I did not expect was the wave of applications from Westbridge flooding into Novasphere. HR had to open a dedicated submission channel. Every day I received emails or messages from old coworkers. Some were short and cold, simply asking if I could find them a suitable position. Others wrote long accounts of the chaos, describing how Westbridge had lost control of its systems and Jonah's frantic blame shifting had drained everyone's spirit. An older accountant sent me a message. Eliana, I know you are busy, but if Novasphere has any position at all, even a low one, please let me know. I just need a job to support my family. Reading that made my chest tighten. I left Westbridge to reclaim my self-worth, but not everyone had the luxury to make that kind of choice. And Jonah? According to office rumors, the board was considering suspending him. Some said he was panicking. Others said he was still defiantly denying everything. The stories conflicted, but one thing was clear: his power was crumbling. Still, I no longer cared what happened to him. I cared about the people left behind. I knew I was not obligated to save anyone. I had done the right thing for myself. But my conscience would not let me look away, even if they came from a place that had never valued me. In the weekly strategic leadership meeting at Novasphere, while everyone was discussing expansion plans for the analytics division, I made my proposal. I want to establish a recruitment support program specifically for employees affected by Westbridge. They have skill, they understand the market, and most importantly, they should not pay the price for Jonah's failures. The room went quiet for a few seconds. I looked around, unsure how they would react. Then Marcus nodded, smiling. I agree. Start drafting the plan. If you want, I will bring it to the executive board for immediate approval. In that moment, I knew I had done the right thing. This was no longer a story about revenge. This was a story about rebuilding lives for people who deserved better. I had just finished a meeting with the development team when Marcus's assistant rushed in, wearing an expression I had rarely seen on her. Eliana, someone is waiting for you in the first floor lobby. He says it is urgent. I froze. Novasphere was a high-security environment. Almost no one could enter without an appointment. I followed her down to the lobby. The moment I walked past the glass corner, I saw a man standing beside the long bench, arms crossed as if he were trying to hold himself together. Jonah Pierce. He looked noticeably thinner, his eyes shadowed from lack of sleep, his coat wrinkled, and his tie loosened as if he had just come from an endless meeting. Yet even in his worn-down state, he still tried to maintain that familiar coldness, as if power had never slipped from his hands. I walked toward him. Jonah looked at me, none of the old arrogance left, but not fully willing to drop the performance either. I need to speak with you, Eliana, he said, his voice hoarse and so unsure that I barely recognized it. I led him into a small meeting room near the lobby. The door closed. No assistants, no staff, just the two of us facing each other. I do not think we have anything left to discuss. My voice stayed calm. Jonah braced his hands on the table and bowed his head for a few seconds as if gathering strength. Westbridge is facing bankruptcy. Our major contracts have pulled out. The system is completely out of control. The board wants to suspend me. He lifted his head and looked at me with strained eyes. I need you to come back, at least as a technical advisor, to stabilize the platform for a few months. I let out a small laugh, not out of amusement, but from the bitter irony of it. Jonah, you do not need me to fix the system. You need someone to shield you. Westbridge is sinking, and you refuse to admit that the person steering the ship wrong is you. Jonah's jaw tightened. Eliana, I know you are angry. I know I was rigid, but this is not the time for revenge. If Westbridge collapses, hundreds of people will lose their jobs. They worked hard. They do not deserve this. It was the first time Jonah mentioned anyone other than himself or his authority, but I did not believe him right away. I knew too well how he used words as instruments. You speak about ethics now, but if you cared so much about them, why did you fire people en masse just to protect your image? Jonah shut his eyes for a moment, as if acknowledging that blow had hit deep. When he opened them again, he no longer tried to act like a commander. The armor cracked, revealing exhaustion and strain I had never seen during my years at Westbridge. I was wrong, Eliana, he said in a voice so soft it sounded like a confession meant only for himself. I thought I could control everything. I thought I understood the system. I underestimated you. And now the whole company is paying for it. His admission did not erase anything, but it softened the air in the room. I stood still for a long moment before speaking. Jonah, I left because I was undervalued, not because I wanted to fight you. But I will not return, not as an advisor, not as a temporary employee, not in any role. That choice ended a long time ago. Jonah lowered his head again. No argument, no defense. I understand. He swallowed hard, as if the words burned his throat. Then, I have one last request. I crossed my arms, waiting. Help my employees, at least them. They did not know anything. They had no part in my decisions. If Novasphere has expansion openings, please consider them priority candidates. They have families. They need work. I have failed them. I was stunned into silence. Jonah Pierce, a man who once rejected any opposing idea and never bowed to anyone, was standing before me pleading for others. I looked at him for a long time. In that moment, every version of him appeared in my mind. The coldness, the arrogance, the ruthlessness, and also the part he hid, the part only visible when everything around him was falling apart. I spoke quietly. I will consider it. Jonah nodded slowly, as if every millimeter of movement carried weight. He turned toward the door, his hand trembling slightly as it touched the handle. Before stepping out, he spoke without looking back. Thank you for listening. The door closed. The room fell so quiet I could hear the hum of the air system. I stood alone, exhaling slowly. That meeting did not change my decision about Jonah, but it made me realize something important. Justice is not always the only ending. The fall of an organization might be a lesson, but the fall of innocent people should never be the cost. I returned to my office, opened my laptop, and reviewed the recruitment support plan for former Westbridge employees. I added several sections, expanded the assistance scope, increased training slots, and priority placements. When I sent the updated plan to Marcus, I added a single line. It is time to do the right thing. And I knew that although the story between Jonah and me was closed, the journey of helping others rise from the wreckage was only beginning. Only 1 week after my last meeting with Jonah, Novasphere officially announced the reemployment and training program for employees affected by Westbridge. Marcus asked me to put my name on the project, and I agreed without hesitation. What happened afterward went far beyond anything I expected. Applications poured in so quickly that Novasphere had to assign a dedicated internal channel just to process them. More than 200 submissions in the first 3 days, then 300, 400, and the number kept climbing. Familiar faces from the old Westbridge hallways, people I had worked with or only nodded to over the coffee machine, were now hoping for a new chance here. I read every file, and each line reminded me that behind a collapsing company were not just cold numbers, but real people and the families who depended on them. Some included messages, just a few sentences, but enough to stop my breath. Thank you for thinking of us. I have 3 children who need medical care. Please give me a chance. Novosphere did what Westbridge never dared to do. They opened temporary offices to host fast track interviews, assigned HR teams to work through weekends, and offered skill refresher courses to anyone needing support before starting a job. I walked through that space every day and could feel the relief in those who had just survived a major upheaval. One former internal audit employee from Westbridge broke down crying when he received his offer letter. If it were not for this program, I would have lost my home, lost everything. I placed a hand on his shoulder, feeling a fraction of the weight behind the decisions I had made. Not long after, Novosphere released the official list. More than 100 people hired. The rest were placed into a 6-week training track for upcoming openings. The reemployment rate was so impressive that financial media began covering the story, calling it the largest workforce rescue in the industry in 10 years. In the middle of that fast-moving momentum, Marcus called me into a meeting on a Friday afternoon. I walked into the room and saw several executives waiting. On the table was a glass plaque engraved with my name, Innovator of the Year. Marcus smiled. You did not just transform Novosphere, you changed the lives of so many people. This is well deserved. I looked at the plaque glowing under the lights. I had never received recognition like this in 9 years at Westbridge. No closed door talks, no vague wording, no suspicious glances, just a simple, sincere acknowledgement. That evening, as I was leaving the office, a young employee ran after me. She had just joined Novosphere through the support program. Eliana, can I ask you something? I stopped and smiled. Go ahead. How do you know when it is time to stand up for your worth? I am afraid I am too new, afraid I am asking for too much, afraid of being seen as difficult. I looked at her and saw myself years ago, diligent, patient, quietly accepting less because I thought silence was part of being professional. I spoke gently. You know, everyone has a breaking point. One day you will wake up and realize the thing draining you is not the work, but pretending you are fine. When you start feeling small inside your own life, that is the moment to stand up. Not to fight, but to remind yourself you deserve respect. Your value is not given by others. You must be the first one to see it. She stayed quiet for a long time, then nodded. I understand. Thank you. In the days that followed, I began building a mentoring program specifically for women in finance. I chose 5 candidates from both Novosphere and former Westbridge staff. I wanted them not only skilled, but strong enough never to repeat the path I had walked. One Monday morning, as I arrived at the office, Marcus handed me an envelope. Someone sent you this. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Jonah Pierce. I opened the envelope. A single letter, handwritten, simple. Eliana, I wish I had seen your value sooner. Congratulations on everything you have achieved. I hope those who once worked under me will have a better future because of your decisions. Jonah. I folded the letter. No anger, no bitterness, just closure. I stood before the glass wall, looking at New York stretching wide beneath me. The city lights reflected across the glass, like a reminder that I had stepped into an entirely different life. 9 years waiting for someone else to recognize my worth had been enough. I smiled softly, placed Jonah's letter in a drawer, and closed it. The past would stay there, and I walked forward. The best decision I ever made was not leaving Westbridge. It was a belief, for the first time in my life, that I deserved more.